I'd like to welcome you to the IOC Annual Ocean Best Practices System Workshop 4. These workshops play an important role in the creation and the use of best practices in our community. We're pleased to have you here, contributing to the future of ocean observing through your participation. I'm Jay Pearlman. I'm co-chair of the Ocean Best Practice System Steering Group. My fellow co-chair is Johannes Karstensen, and the program manager is Pauline Simpson. It's my pleasure at this point to introduce Johannes Karstensen, who will provide an overview of the best practices and of the best practice system. Johannes?
Thank you, Jay. I think you all now should see my screen, I hope. Yes, okay. Good, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. So it's my really pleasure now to present you a very short overview about the workshop and also to introduce you to the Ocean Best Practices system and activities. So my name, as Jay just said, is Johannes Karstensen. I'm from Germany, from the GeoMar. I'm a physical oceanographer, seagoing physical oceanographer, and part of the IOC Ocean Best Practices team. As Jay just said, I also would like to thank all of you to participate here in that meeting. And I will now tell you a bit why we are here. So the Ocean Best Practices System, OBPS, Workshop 4. That is a workshop for ocean practitioners, and we hope with this workshop that we all can collaboratively address design creation of ultimately best practices. As Jay just said, an important outcome will be to have recommendations for the Ocean Best Practices System. And these recommendations should help us to assist you, the community, in developing, improving common and recognized methodologies for all different areas of ocean observing and the application that comes with it. So we will have the outcome of the workshop, the outcome of the workshop will actually guide us also in the process to define our next implementation phase for the system, for the Ocean Best Practice system. And that actually is why we have created a relatively complex reporting template, which we hope you can all follow, because it will be extremely important for us to have that input in order to create the implementation or define the implementation phase. So what we would like to do now is to get a little bit of an overview about who is actually attending. Normally you would do a tour de table, which is probably not a good idea with so many people on the call. But what we can do is we can have a poll actually doing that. And Ben and Nenad, you just were introduced to them. They will now do that. So please, you see the poll now all in your windows. Please scroll down also. There are 4 questions, and just fill that out. In the meantime, Ben will also tell you a bit more housekeeping things.
Thank you so much, Johannes. Yeah, Ben Roberts here, the lead tech host for the workshop. Along with Nenad Malkovich, who's supporting me. And just wanted to mention a couple of things on the tech side for you to help you have the best possible experience. Nenad pointed out that at the top of your Zoom window, you can control the view that you have. When there's screen sharing going on, this side-by-side view option is quite nice, because you get a little slider that controls how big the image of someone is versus how big the screen sharing is that they're doing. So recommend that. We have set it up right now so you cannot unmute yourself. If you need to reach out to us, you can send a chat message to Nenad And he should be listed at the top of your participants list because he is one of the co-hosts, Nenad Malkovich. The chat to everyone we're using just for questions. So I know sometimes it's nice to get a whole lot of conversation going in the chat, but we really want to keep that fairly clear for questions during the different presentations to be posted there. And we'll be monitoring those, particularly in the later part of today's call when we have presentations coming back from each of the working groups and a panel discussion from them. So let's see what else to tell you. You can rename yourself if Zoom hasn't picked up the name that you want. If you click the participants icon at the bottom of the Zoom window, you should see your name near the top. And then if you hover over that, you'll see more and rename as an option. And go ahead and put the name that you want people to see there. And I think that's pretty much all. You've noticed that we are recording this, and so if you need to review this later or share it with others, that's also an option. And then if you need to contact us at any time during the workshop, I'm putting in a link now to a document that gives you various ways to go ahead and do that. And this is also in Kiko Chat. At the top of the Kiko Chat window, you see some tabs, and one of them says Workshop Help. So I think we're getting close to being done with the poll, and we'll go ahead and share the results now. So here we go. We got 84 people have voted. And
okay.
Turn it back.
So you can scroll yourself, right? Everybody can scroll. So nearly half of us are ocean observers, but of course there are also policymakers, few data managers, management, very interesting, mostly mid-career, and astonishing many people from Europe. Also, it's Friday night in Europe. Very much appreciated that you are here. And okay, so we have also people that attended former workshops, which speaks for the workshop, I think. So people like to come again. Okay, I'll close that now. Oops, and we move further to the agenda. This is a very, very short version of the agenda. Of course, you have seen the complex agenda maybe before, but oops, it comes up again here. So what, yesterday was the first event actually of this workshop, which was the early career ocean professionals meeting. And Cora Horstman and also Jordan van Stavel, they organized that, and they will also be accompanying us through the whole process. You've seen that at all the working groups, the 11 working groups we have, there are also ECOPs, as we call them, very, very closely involved as leads, actually. We are all leads, co-leads, leads. There are 3 panels. Today is the first panel, next Friday is the second panel, and then there is another mini panel next Wednesday. And then I would also like to pay attention to the cafes and the open space, which is designed in order to meet and to discuss, say, in an open environment. Oops. So coming to what we are all after in whatever way, and that is best practices. What I show you here is one part of the definition for best practices, and you can read that here. Best practice is a methodology that has repeatedly produced superior results relative to other methodologies with the same objective. That is very intuitive, very, very clear, I think. Still, people may say, well, I have a good method, but I don't know if this is the best method. Or others may say there are multiple methods that try to do the same thing. How do I know what are the real best ones? So there's another part to it, which is to be a best practice, to be fully elevated to be a best practice. A promising method will have to be adapted and employed by multiple organizations or communities. So this is very important. This is also a central part of this meeting here. What are these communities? How to elevate that? So why are we interested in best practices? What are the impact, the benefit of having best practices actually? They are the basis for a seamless connection in functional chains. For example, the ocean observing value chain. So they are thus, therefore, a guarantor for interoperability all along that chains. And they have a number of attributes. Quality and consistency of observations is what best practices ensure. They also ensure efficiency because you do not need to reinvent the wheel or measure actually the same thing again. They also make sure that there is transparency and data traceability, reproducibility across all different levels of observing. They also ensure that there's a seamless linkage between data, models, and the application that comes out of the data and the models. And of course, best practices are also a resource for training and capacity development. So what now is the ocean best practices system? That's being depicted here in the schematic. The heart of the system is actually in the right, which is the ocean best practices repository. This is really a permanent repository installed at the IODE and supported by WUS and IOC. And then there are, in that repository, actually you find about more than 1,100 documents, which are all uploaded at the end, created by you, by the community. And these documents are actually of different nature, and only a few of them are real best practices, as we would define them. They are manuals, documents, and so forth. But this is a very, very big pool of wisdom that's actually in this repository. And around that wisdom, the whole ocean best practices system structures with different compartments. There's a technology compartment that's directly posed to the repository, and that's used to automatically harvest and utilize the document content. There's, of course, support and training directly linked to that make use of these documents, convert them eventually into educational and teaching material. There's a communication part, of course, the upper part, which is with networks, organizations, programs, and so forth, that all have an interest in making ocean observing interoperable across all scales, and that needs best practices. And finally, there's also a journal connected that helps to publish work that is related to best practices in an open access domain, which is the frontiers in marine science. And in the center of everything, you see the users, which are really the suppliers also, but also those which take up what's being produced and created within the ocean best practices system, but also the system is designed around that. So what actually, yeah, in a nutshell, we can say OBPS is a sustained system for promoting and supporting ocean best practices across observations, data management, and applications. So there's also an IOC Ocean Best Practices System project, and that project naturally is structured around all these different elements. Project management is one work package, resource development, repository, technology development, the review journal, communication and outreach, user communities, and training and capacity building. So what you see here is a picture, a beautiful picture, actually, of the Ocean Best Practices Steering Group. 4 people are missing actually on the picture, but this is the group that tries to bring these things together and think about that. And, oops, sorry. But what we rely on is actually we want you to work with us, and we want also for you to have the right tools ready. So there's really, really a lot of communication needed. And what we also want is we want you to join us. So coming now to one of our future perspectives, I don't want to go into details here, which is, but for many observers, ocean observers, of course, the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And what is shown here are the different themes of the decade. And I just show that without going into details, because on the right, what you see here is the workshop working group, the working groups of the workshop, 11 working groups. And when you do a kind of linkage, you will see that all of these workshops are related to points that are, or to topics that are being touched on in the UN Decade. And we will have a kind of discussion on that next. And I think it really expresses the close linkages between best practices actually and the decade. So that really calls for action. So with that, I say thank you and hand now over again back to Jay.
Thank you, Johannes. We certainly would welcome questions in the chat if there are some, and we can do that during the day as we move on. Very interesting discussion of the ocean best practices system, and certainly a capability that the community has adopted through many, many contributions of best practices. Its impact on the decade, and in fact, the whole subject of the decade, is our next subject. And for this, I'd like to introduce Frank Muller-Karger, who's a member of the Ocean Best Practices Steering Group. Frank?
Thank you, Jay, and thank you, Johannes. Next, we have a panel. We have several people that are going to talk to us about developing best practices during and for the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. It is a theme that we're all very excited about. We're going to have the session to be co-chaired by Fangli Qiao. Fangli is a professor at the First Institute of Oceanography in the Ministry of Natural Resources in China, and Elva Escobar at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. And Elva is a professor at the institution. I will introduce the other panelists later, but I'm going to let Elva take over the session.
Thank you very much, Frank. I actually appreciate this invitation, and I thank you all the organizers. The way we will carry out the panel is actually based on two presentations. The way we have organized it is 8 minutes of statements, starting Dr. Fangli Qiao, and then myself. We will speak about the UN Decade of Ocean Sciences for Sustainable Development and how best practices can achieve and benefit from the decade. Thank you. Fangli, I give you the word to start.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. This is Fangli Qiao from the First Institute of Oceanography, Ministry of Natural Resources of China. It's my great pleasure to take part in this Ocean Best Practice workshop. This workshop is focused on developing best practice during the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, especially on ocean observation. So I would like to share with you the following 3 key points. The first is the review of our main progress or best practice on ocean observation in history. To my knowledge, the CSAT-A launched by NASA of the United States in 1978 provided us the first chance to overview the global ocean in real time. And recently, China contributed much on ocean satellites. The second jump is the tall treating area in the tropical Pacific, which started in the 1980s and let us have the ability to monitor the evolution and provide the initial conditions for the prediction of ENSO, which clearly demonstrated the dominant role of ocean in climate system. Then, started at the beginning of this century, the Argo floats provide us the third jump in monitoring the global ocean from surface to 2,000 meters in real time. The second is the suggested area to be investigated. The first is the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development will stimulate innovation and amplify access to existing and new technologies to increase the diversity and scope of ocean exploration, to dramatically reduce the cost of ocean observation, including sensors and data transmission, etc., and then greatly enhance our monitoring ability of the global ocean should be an important direction. Till now, the cost for ocean observation is still very high. If we could reduce the cost to 10%, we will have 10 times the ability to monitor the global ocean. This is not a dream. We should try our best. The second is the observation in deep ocean, in the Southern Ocean and the polar regions will be highly encouraged in the decade. The decade will enhance and expand the existing ocean observing system across all ocean basins to deliver information on essential ocean variables, including social and economic, geological, physical, chemical, bathymetric, biological ecology parameters, and observations on human interaction with the ocean. The fourth is data sharing is highly encouraged in the decade. Although lots of efforts have been done for data sharing, we still have a long way to solve this complicated problem. The third point is capacity development and popularization can give us more momentum in the decade. The first point is in the scientific community, the transfer of ocean science and technology, including on ocean observation, between senior and junior generations has received much attention during the past half century. However, the transfer of ocean knowledge among science community, decision makers, and public is still quite weak. The second is to mobilize the public to take part in ocean observation, or called popularization, will be a new momentum for enhancing the ocean observation. Voluntary observation ship is a successful trial, which could be enhanced in the decade. So thank you very much. So Elva, thank you very much.
She's on mute.
My microphone was closed and I was trying to open it, but it didn't open. Thank you so much. Well, I'll give a few words related to the Ocean Decade, and I really appreciate Dr. Fangli that you gave us these nice words. I will start by asking, why do we need a decade of ocean sciences? And as an oceanographer, I have to recognize that the ocean is an important workplace. I love to be at sea. It holds values that are essential to human beings, like water, oxygen that we breathe, and food, without which we would not be able to survive, not 1 day, not 3 days. It is also a source of income for many, of livelihood for many generations, and resources for the growing world population. Ocean ecosystems have been facing cumulative impacts from the decade of human activities in need in land, leading to overexploitation, pollution, biodiversity loss, all in synergy with climate change that have forced unprecedented changes in the ocean, losing its capacity to deliver goods and services to humankind. So the decade is once in a lifetime opportunity. It allows us to transform the way ocean science is done and delivered. It is the decade of everyone. The decade invites us all to build on existing efforts, to engage and start collaborating with multiple stakeholders. It seeks to connect knowledge generators and users in an iterative process of ocean science to find science-driven solutions, improving the state of ocean in benefit of life and the planet. So, what is the UN Decade of Ocean Science? In words of the IOC Secretary, ocean science is a broad concept and it encompasses the natural and social scientific disciplines. It includes the local and indigenous knowledge, the science policy and science innovation interfaces, and the technology and infrastructure to carry out research. But however, somehow, we have failed delivering the timely results to users, to involve the equity, gender, generational balance, and the ocean citizens to participate and take responsibility. In this one-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the decade seeks to trigger change, transformation, and the generation of qualitative and quantitative ocean knowledge from ocean regions that are poorly described. An example, the Antarctic, the deep ocean, those coastal oceans that are poorly described, and involve actively the small island developing states, the least developed countries, the landlocked developing states, to contribute with decade programs, projects, actions for resolving the 10 challenges and that provide 7 of the decade outcomes.
Okay, we have a Karstensen.
Yes, Edem. I will just briefly finish and then provide you the word. Is that okay? So
looks like this was unintentional, probably.
Okay, so where are we now in the decade roadmap? We have an implementation plan. We have a decade virtual series. The first call for decade actions will be launched as part of the Ocean Decade in mid-October, focusing on large-scale, multi-country transformative programs to enhance sustainably the ocean science. And to ensure the decade actions contribute to the common vision and priorities, we need to support them with underlying principles and criteria that foresee that contribution need to fulfill the Ocean Decade challenges, accelerate the generation of user knowledge, to understand the ocean with emerging methodologies, to co-design and co-deliver by knowledge generators and users, to ensure that all data and knowledge are provided in an open access shared discoverable format repositories, to strengthen partnership and networking for ocean observing, and contribute toward capacity development and useful products to society. But in particular, to overcome the barriers to diversity and equity, and engage with local and indigenous knowledge holders. Just to finish, enabling the decade vision and mission requires a community of practice that shares, advances, and converges on methods and standards for observing and living sustainably with our ocean. This requirement rests on good science, interoperability of data and communication, applications, and strong spirit of collaboration. This session and our panel will offer the decade's perspective to set the tone for the Ocean Best Practices Workshop to address challenges in ocean best practices, solutions to increase transformative ocean knowledge and capacity at the local, the regional, and the global scales. Thank you.
Thank you, Elva. And thank you, Fangli. I want to recognize that Elva and Fangli are both members of the executive planning group of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So it's really an honor to have them here and to provide the opening statements for the panel. I also want to recognize the sponsors of this workshop. That's the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, especially the project that they funded, the OBPS, the Ocean Best Practices System. Also the US National Science Foundation through the Ocean Ops Research Coordination Network, and the European community through a large number of different projects. So next, we're going to have some panelists, and the panelists are going to have 3 minutes each to give a statement. Then we will go into a discussion with our leads, with our co-chairs of the session, and the panelists. First, we're going to have Wenxi Zhu. Wenxi is the director of the IOC Westpac Regional Secretariat, and he's going to talk about capacity development. Then we have Claudia Baron. Claudia Baron Aguilar is from Colombia. She's an aquaculture specialist and marine scientist, and she's a member of the indigenous Guayú tribe in coastal Colombia. She's also an early career ocean professional, or what we call ECOP, under the decade. Then Edem Mahu from the University of Ghana in the Department of Marine and Fisheries Sciences will talk about her activities in biogeochemistry in Ghana. So Wenxi, please.
Thank you very much, Frank. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening to all. I think this is very important moment to talk about capacity development, particularly on the eve of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So needless to emphasize, the capacity development is an essential tenet of the decade. So speaking of best practice of capacity development, I think there are many, but they vary, from one to another, very much subject to what kind of target beneficiary and also what kind of socio-economic political system those capacity was carried forward. So drawing on, I think there are several decades of experience in the developing region, Asia. I think we consider the capacity development is not only about standalone activities, but more importantly as a transformative process through which individual, country, society can obtain and also sustain the capacity to achieve their goal over the time. So it's always, the strong capacity locally generated and sustained is very essential to the successful, capacity development efforts. So there are a lot of tremendous experience, I think, in different region and among different target beneficiary. In our region, I think we are very much, rely on the strong ownership of the country and also rely on their financial support and also on many, very specialized research institute in the region. We developed or have been developing a regional network of training research centers. So talking about UN Decade, I think one of great challenges for the UN Decade is how to inspire a broad range of stakeholders, and engage them into their co-design and also co-development of ocean science agenda. So this is a kind of I think a great challenge I think UN Decade need to address. This is also the case for capacity development in the decade. As a decade, we will not only address research capacity, but also need to address the capacity to use the science to develop solutions for sustainable development and how to influence the design of science agenda and also policy making, decision making mechanism. So in that sense, we consider the decade should empower as far as possible the people, institutions, and countries, and make the most of local resources, including people, skill, financial resources, institutions, technologies, and also encourage ocean stakeholders at all levels, global level, regional level, even local level, and take an essential role in translating the global capacity development objectives and its strategic framework into actionable initiative at all levels. I think in order to promote the solution-oriented research under the UN Decade, I think the region and also the national, the stakeholder at regional and national level, even local level, need to be, get engaged, and play a more active role than before. So partnership and network, I think, remain key to success. As I mentioned, the UN Decade is going to bring about the transformative change to ocean science by engaging different stakeholders into the process. So partnership and the networking, I think, are key to success. So we need, build on their existing capacity or development efforts and also network, and also further reach out to other different stakeholders and also partners. For instance, we need partners with the aquarium and the research institution again to further promote ocean science popularization and also ocean literacy, for the general public, for their children. And also we need, work more closely with a lot of universities, for formal education. We also need to work more, closely with particular with our national ocean competent agency ministries, in order to, step our efforts in assisting or strengthening the connection between the ocean research community and the policy-making, decision-making community, and other relevant stakeholders as well through the development process of solution-oriented program, project, or actions at local, national, and also global level. So this is some perspective and also preliminary thoughts I will share with our audience, in this plenary session. Thank you very much. I would like to pass on the floor to the chair.
Thank you very much, Wenxi. Next, we have Claudia Baron. I appreciate if the speakers stay to the 3-minute limit, please, or we will run out of time.
Okay, well, thank you. Good afternoon. I have the great opportunity to address you today. I'm not usually a person of too many words, but I want to share my perspective and struggles not only as an early career ocean professional, but as an early career ocean professional Indigenous woman. So as you can imagine, I have too many things that I want to share with you, but I'm going to try to stick with the basics. I want to tell you, I was raised far away from my native community. My mom wanted for me and my brothers better education and better opportunities. But I was also raised to be proud of who I was, of who I am, of my community, of my traditions. And in all honesty, this wasn't hard. I love being Wayu. And the people around me, my friends and my classmates, they made that really easy for me because I was different, but I was different in a good way. They were always curious about my traditions and respectful of who I was. I had a strong personality, so they knew the kind of trouble they will get into if they messed with me. However, I had to face also some situations, and at around 10 years old, one of my classmates approached me and she said to me, you look like a native Indian with those earrings. You shouldn't wear them. So in other words, she was telling me that I should feel ashamed of my identity and to hide it. Then again at 17, I was asked if I wasn't ashamed of being a native Indian, as if I should. Both of them got a piece of my mind, and hopefully they ended being more educated persons. But today I remember those events, and for me, they stayed in the past. If anything, I'm stronger, and I'm not saying it was okay because it wasn't, but my self-esteem was in the right place for me not to let those things affect my life as a burden, so I don't carry them with me. Sadly, this is not the case for most Indigenous people. They are bullied every day to grow out of their identity. I have seen painful situations in which the dignity of fellow Wayus was shattered. We are losing our identity, our traditions, and our knowledge. As an Indigenous, in 2009, I got a scholarship to pursue my master's degree here in the United States. And after completing my grad students, I was eager to go back to Colombia. I was so ready to go and find a job in marine sciences and give back to my community. And guess what? I was overqualified, or I didn't have enough experience, or I was underqualified, and the salaries that were offered to me there were a joke. And that is not only my experience, that's also the experience of many of my classmates who ended giving up their careers. There are many professionals and too few jobs, and unfortunately this scenario is the result of very low budget for science and research, especially in Latin American and the Caribbean countries. And the not so funny part about this is that these are geographically privileged countries with a lot of resources, ecosystems, and biodiversity that need to be taken care of and used in responsible ways. But governments don't want to invest money. So we people, scientists, are supposed to work out of love, but love doesn't pay rent. So we end up doing anything else. Bear with me here, I'm about to finish, but I want to share with you also one of the challenges I have had as a woman in science. So after not finding a job for 2 years, we got the opportunity to come back here to the United States. My husband is doing his PhD. And I went to a professor, and I asked him if maybe there was an opportunity for me to be part of his lab. And his answer was, he said this to me. He said, at your age, you should reconsider getting into grad school because it is not for everybody. Also, there are so many things you have to do because you have 2 kids, right? Besides, your husband is already doing his PhD. And he told me all this with a smile on his face. Somehow he got to question my whole self in a phrase. I was told I was too old. My role as a mom was denying me the opportunity to keep being a scientist. And as a woman, I should stay at home and support my husband because he pursuing his PhD should be enough for me. That day, I needed the self-esteem of my 10-year-old self. My bottom line here is that the world is wasting excellent human potential. We indigenous people are resilient, creative, and recursive people holding a lot of knowledge. We are also wasting young minds, scientists that invested money and time in their education just to get a diploma and not getting to use their talents. And we women, we need to be recognized by our talents and capacities and not by the tax that others have put on us. The decade of ocean science itself, so as the development of ocean best practices, are perfect opportunities and scenarios for inclusivity, for equity, to rescue and use and promote indigenous traditions, culture, and knowledge, to give an impulse to early career ocean professionals and to recognize women's contribution to science and society by purposely open spaces for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, for that very profound message. And I hope that the decade really brings this kind of opportunity. Thank you. And now we have Edem Mahu. Edem, you're on.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah. So I'm going to be speaking on ocean observation requirements for climate change and fisheries, and also societal needs. We all know, as an ocean observing community, we know the role the ocean plays in regulating our climates and also supporting our fisheries, as well as also the role it plays in our societies, our various societies. And as a community, we need to take cognizance of this relevance and design observation methods or approaches that, you know, spans or cuts across the various segments or components of when it comes to climate change, when it comes to fisheries and all that. So I would start by asking what the observation requirements are for climate. Currently, we all know that as far as the scope is concerned, we have the global observation systems, and we also have ocean basin or regional or region-specific observations. With the global observation systems, as far as climate change is concerned, we are normally dependent on space-based approaches, such as satellite observations. And this, yeah, truly, they are able to cover a lot of areas, or even globally, everywhere, every part of the ocean. But when it comes to the specific ocean basins, there are areas that we are not able to, you know, cover. So in terms of the scope, these are the 2 broad areas. We have the global, we have a community of observers who are looking at global situations, and we have people who are, you know, focusing on specific ocean basins. And the approach, as I talked about, we have the in situ and space-based approaches. The in situ measurements are very relevant if we want to cover areas where the satellites cannot reach, and also to calibrate and validate what our space-based observations are giving us. But currently, we have a need in this area because it's not all parts or all ocean basins that are being observed as far as in situ measurements are concerned. There are some regions that are still understudied, and we need to start thinking of how to develop technologies and best practice methods or approaches that can cover these understudied areas as far as climate change is concerned. We also need to also think about how we can sustain these observations. So coming from a developing country, I know that we from the developing countries, or in Africa, for example, we cannot match up to what is happening globally when it comes to ocean observation, because we do not have the technology. And even when we talk about best practice approaches, there are best practice methods that have been developed that we are not able to adopt those methods as far as those of us in Africa are concerned. And so we are lagging, and we need data from all these parts of the world to sort of, come out with very conclusive messages about what is happening in the oceans. When it comes to fisheries management, again, this one, currently what is happening is we have more of a regional approach, but in some instances there are also global scopes. So we have the issue of sargassum, which has become a very global problem now. And we have seen like the global ocean observing community trying to understand the scope of the sargassum problem. This is global, but with fisheries, most of the work that has been done is more on regional levels and also at the national levels. Again, when it comes to the need, we need to come out with technology and best practice development across the biological, physical, and biochemical domains. And we must consider also the human stresses. So overfishing is a problem. Plastics are becoming a problem now, and we all understand the impact on the fisheries. So this other human stresses must also be looked at as far as the ocean observation is concerned. And then for societal needs, whatever we are doing is to benefit society. And so the need to respond to specific societal needs is also very, very relevant as far as ocean observation is concerned. Ocean observation must be stakeholder-led. We must include our governments, we must include the communities, we must include scientists. It's not just about scientists, but the data that we collect must be very beneficial to all this group of people. And of course, it must inform policy and decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, Edem. I would like to invite all the panelists to turn on their video and their microphones. Hi, Edem. Good to see you. So it is now a chance to ask questions. We don't have a lot of time, really, but any questions? I see lots of comments on the panelists, lots of really synergies with what Claudia mentioned. Edem, if you can turn your video on, that would be great. Any questions? I have a question, and maybe for Edem and also for Claudia. And how do you see, I mean, both of you made very strong arguments for involving developing nations and indigenous communities and local communities. What is the best way to do that over the next 10 years as part of the Ocean Best Practices Group and in general for the decade?
Well, I think the best way to do it is to recognize every area where you go as an individual. Like you can just not generalize you can just not make a single approach to get to different people. So you have to get to know the community you are approaching. And of course, we will have to think about sustainable solutions. So after the decade or after the time it's completed, the solution is still there.
Edem?
Okay, yes, so when Fangli was speaking, he actually made reference to the fact that ocean observation is very, very expensive. And I believe that that is one of the reasons why developing nations are not able to catch up or match up with the advanced nations. And so I think that, yes, we need to reach out to these developing nations. When we are coming out with technologies, we should also start thinking of how we can develop cheaper technologies that can, still give us the results that we want, that can still, be classified as a best practice, but, cheaper, so that if we are not getting the support from advanced nations, our national governments can actually, support us to get these cheaper technologies. We need to also think of collaborating. So we need the support from the advanced nations. We've started doing some of these things. So what we do is, when we are doing research, we try to partner with this developed countries for collaborations. And so once we do that, we are able to also fill some of the knowledge gaps. Also, capacity building is very, very crucial. We need to invest in building capacity. We need to make sure that the capacity building, it shouldn't just be human capacity building, but also it should be institutional. I once made a comment at a meeting that, yes, we have attended so many meetings, we have been to so many meetings, we have been trained, we have been taught how to use certain equipment and all that, but you come back to your continent and you don't have them. So then you have gone to build a capacity, but you don't have what it takes, or you don't have what it takes to actually put the skill that you have acquired to use. And so I think that these are the three things: collaboration, capacity building, and also coming out with more cheaper technologies that can be afforded by developing nations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Edem. I would like to ask the co-chairs of the session a question about the lessons learned from the situation that we're all going through with COVID-19. We have a global challenge. We're talking about having a decade of ocean observations. What are the things that we can learn from the present situation in terms of best practices on how we can improve life for everybody based on ocean observing? So Elva and Fangli. We need to allow the
thank you.
Thank you.
I'll say it in just one word. I think partnerships and networking. I think the lessons that we have learned from this pandemic, for instance, is that the more we partnership, the more we integrate and co-design and co-produce science for one benefit, it allows us all to be there and achieve the goals. Thank you.
So thank you. I have 2 points. The first is, as Adam mentioned, the observation is still very expensive. So we need a new technology, and we need to share the technology, okay, to reduce the cost. This is very important. The second is, as some issues like the COVID-19 have a much influence on the observation. So the audio observation this is a kind of new technology can help us to get more data. Thank you.
Thank you. Wenxi, do you have something to contribute in this discussion, also in response to Edem's call for capacity development? We need to unmute Wenxi. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Frank. I think it's exactly, I think one size never fit all, particularly when we consider our capacity developments. So different regions have different situation. I mean, different infrastructure, to conduct those kind of observation. So I think just to share some experience from our region, I think, after many decades of capacity development, as I said, we consider as transformative process. We have to mainly rely on, what we have and start from what we have, and with the support from, the assistance from developed country, and gradually build our capacity. So, and also this is something I think we have achieved, over the last 10 days, rely on local expertise, local institution, and local support. And also with some assistance from, other developed countries like United States or, other developed countries. Because, capacity building is always a long-lasting topic. And also there's no best solution that can address all different, capacity in the world. So different regions have to take a different approach. So this is my point.
Great, thank you very much. We are coming to the end of this session. I think that there's some very important messages here in what you have said. The session has been recorded. We will try to extract the nuggets from what you have said. It is clear that the equity and inclusion issues are really important. The issue of cost and how you make the technology accessible to a lot of people is the only way that we're going to increase the geographic coverage of ocean observing. But we also need to include the local knowledge, and this is something that we struggle with in developing these systems like the Ocean Best Practices system. How do we include local knowledge and indigenous knowledge? How do we approach these communities to understand their needs and do the capacity building so that they can also participate in solving their problems, but contribute to solving much larger scale issues that we all have to deal with as the planet is changing. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jay Pearlman and hand off to the breakout sessions.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you to all the panelists. This was a very compelling session and one that will give us a lot to think about as we move forward in the next week, but more important in the long term with the OBPS. We have started discussing the inclusion of indigenous knowledge, a very essential part of our knowledge in the world, as part of the OBPS through a project that we have in Europe, and it relates to the building of an Arctic practices repository, Arctic practices system. In fact, it's a much broader issue than the Arctic, and so I certainly would encourage this dialogue to continue this week, perhaps creating some strong recommendations for the OBPS to move forward. Let me move now to the next sessions. The working groups are a core part of this workshop, and they address perspectives of disciplines, whether that's in fisheries or in sargassum or other areas, and also cross-cutting issues that we have to address relating to how data is handled or the convergence of methods. It's these workshops which will represent the thoughts of our community, the ones here and others, as we begin to develop recommendations.